Okay, it's live now, I guess.
Okay.
Okay, I think we can start speaking around.
Okay. So welcome everyone to this joint webinar between Manchester Metropolitan University and the Centre for Digital Society at the University of Gajah Mada. Very pleased to welcome colleagues and guests to this event. So my name is Kevin Wong, and I'm here from Manchester Metropolitan University and hosting the webinar on the Manchester Metropolitan University's behalf. And we have our colleagues over at the Centre for Digital Society, Jay, who will be co-hosting. So just to give everyone an idea about the event, and just to let people know that I think I just had a message from a colleague saying that they're having some difficulty getting onto the live channel. I don't know if that could if anyone can help with that, but
Okay.
anyway, I'll carry on talking anyway, and hopefully any technical difficulties can be resolved fairly quickly. So the way we're going to run this event is that we've got two really interesting presentations today. One from Dr. Adi Kuntsman from Manchester Metropolitan University. Adi speak first for around 25 minutes, and then we have 15 minutes for questions. And then after that, we have our colleague Pasca from the Centre for Digital Society, who will be speaking for, again, 25 minutes. And then we'll have 15 minutes of questions. And the questions, people are invited to submit their questions using the chat function on the YouTube channel. And what we'll try to do is that we'll try and manage the questions and where we can. And Jay will help us by reading out the questions.
Right.
And where we can, we'll try and group questions on similar themes together so that we can try and respond to people's interests and comments as we go through. Okay. So I'm just going to pass over to Jay just to talk about how to let everyone know how the questions will work, and then Jay will then hand back over to Adi, and then Adi will commence her presentation. Over to you, Jay.
Yeah, okay. So hi everyone. I'm Jay, or Janitra Haryanto. You can call me Jay. I'm a project officer in the Partnership Research Division of Center for Digital Society, Gajah Mada University, and I will co-host this discussion with Kevin today. So I guess I'm just gonna explain a little bit about the technicalities of asking question in this discussion. So the discussion, the Q&A session will be, I think it will be there after each presentation of each speakers. And then if you feel like having any question, or if you want to ask any question, you can just comment in the chat, in the chat room of the live YouTube video. Anytime, just comment it. And then when we're approaching the Q&A session of each speakers, I guess we'll be ready to sort the question. And then after that, I'm just going to read two or three questions, I guess, at the first session of the first Q&A session. All right. So I guess about the number of the questions that we accept, I guess it will be flexible. I guess if there's more than three questions, well, I think at first we're just going to accept three questions on each Q&A session. But I guess let's see, if we still have more time, I guess we can accommodate more question. I guess so. Okay. Okay, Kevin.
Okay. So over to you, Adi, if you'd like to perhaps share your presentation and then talk us through it, that'd be great.
Yep. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Okay. Can you see the slides now?
Yes, we
Yeah?
can.
Can you
Yep.
see the
Yeah,
slides?
yeah,
Excellent.
we can. Yeah.
Excellent. So the title of the talk is Citizenship in the Age of the Selfie, which is slightly different to the talk that I've given. It's kind of thinking about, I mean, it's a version of what I was going to talk about, thinking about selfies and the problems and risks of visibility and what that means to practices of citizenship. So my interest in the topic, just a bit of a background, my interest in the topic of selfies as something that's deeply political rather than just personal began a while ago in early 2010s when selfies just began storming the public imagination. You may remember they only entered the Oxford Dictionary in 2013. So journalists and media pundits bemoaned the new obsession and they shamed selfie takers as tasteless, vulgar, inappropriate. And the use of selfies for any political projects was either dismissed or met with shock and disbelief. Obviously, this has changed a lot. So I'm kind of looking back at what happened to selfies as a political practice. So back then, I was working on a topic which was seemingly miles away from selfies, although it was also focusing on social media. I was working on a project together with my colleague Rebecca Stein on the role of internet and social media in facilitating state militancy and political violence. And we were focusing on Israeli military occupation of Palestine and the way militarist culture and politics were kind of spilling into the digital domain, how they were transformed and how they were changed, and how social media was supporting state violence. So this book, as a result of it, already came several years ago. So we weren't looking at selfies. We were looking at how state violent military operations were supported by citizens on this seemingly informal medium of social media. So we were following the newly emerging phenomena of how wars and armed assaults were announced on Twitter, how racist patriots that were supporting the murderous state were using mass meme actions, or militarized Facebook as a tool of propaganda, which now again has become a kind of commonplace. So selfies started creeping up to our digital fieldwork. First, it was Facebook photographs of soldiers they were posting during their actions in the occupied Palestine. So whether it's posting in Palestinian homes or in front of blindfolded, uncuffed detainees at checkpoints, like the example of this one. Then we began seeing kind of the genre has evolved. So we began seeing Instagram snapshots of soldiers. Now, if they hadn't had a uniform, you would not have guessed that these are soldiers. So these appeared on Instagram in 2012 during Israel's military assault on Gaza, and this is like in the midst of carnage and devastation, which was brought by Israeli air raid. The soldiers were capturing and sharing snapshots of themselves, and it's young men and women in uniform. Some of them are resting in the sun, riding on a bus, getting dressed or hugging, and many of them had a kind of retro filters, so they were all beautified. Let me see if I can show a few more of them. No, these are the main ones. So they were beautified in the kind of Instagram aesthetic, with no reference to the violence that they were going to commit. The only place where we can find the deadly force of what they were doing was in the title. So this one, for example, said "We're coming for you, Gaza," and also in hashtags, which, by the way, rather than using them as a kind of algorithmic tool, we were asking what would happen if you read the hashtags together next to each other. So I have a selection of hashtags for you here. So there was a really unsettling conjunction of the patriotic and the intimate, the lethal, the brutal, and the playful. So since that time, since early 2010s, we saw a proliferation of soldier selfies. Now we know these are not unique to Israel, but we were specifically working on that context. So there were Instagram photos of half-naked soldiers, sometimes their genitalia masked by weapons, snapshots, smartphone snapshots of female recruits that were nothing but weapons and ammunition, sometimes close-up of soldier faces in the background of empty homes and landscapes that they have invaded. So in the process, one could notice a shift in the iconography in what is depicted in the selfie. from enacting violence through display by showing what the soldiers are doing and showing the victims, the Palestinians, to basically eliminating the Palestinians altogether and kind of enacting violence of militarism through erasure. But in all these cases, we argue that these were instances of militarized digital citizenship. So the very idea of Israeli notion of national citizenship, which is deeply embedded in militarist culture, took shape in this new social grammar. So selfies up until then were used as something kind of playful, not related to the state, not related to wars. So wars were spilling into the social media domain. That's another example. Today, soldier selfies, or to be honest, any other selfies for that matter, no longer surprise us. Israeli army spokesman, so this is the one, the person on the left, is regularly posting selfies in the midst of military operation. Israeli civilians use the language of selfies to express their support of state's atrocious attacks. So here is one example of where Israeli civilians were calling the state to go harder and even more violent in attacking Gaza. So they're all holding messages saying basically death to Palestinians or the people of Israel demand revenge. So they have it on post-it notes, babies holding little pieces of paper and sometimes writing on their bodies. So as we were researching this, also globally, the phenomena of selfie-based political messages, as in a person with usually a poster and a hashtag. So this phenomena has become increasingly common. So since then, we've become accustomed to photographs of individuals with handwritten banners on just about any topic. We are all clean, no makeup selfies, Black Lives Matter, um, and most recently and most relevantly to us, the stay-at-home selfies. So basically, just to show you again the iconography of it's literally a person, sometimes a group of people holding a poster with a message in a range of languages, with a range of contexts, some mundane, some very serious, some local to a particular nation, some global. So this one, which is very familiar to everyone now, is basically global. Um, More often coming from doctors and health workers saying, we stay at work for you, please stay at home for us. One on the left is from children supporting the National Health Services. But the kind of, hopefully you get the idea of what a kind of selfie, politicized selfie looks like. So the circulation of these selfies is global, and the iconography, what appears in the selfie is often deceivingly similar. They look the same. These. If you look at them without knowing the context, without reading the language, they look the same. However, their motivations, their causes, and their context vary. Some of them stand against police abuse or military occupation. Some call for clearer cities, smaller classrooms. Some promote the charity cause or social awareness, and some incite for violence and war. So many of these are grassroots projects. That is, they're not instigated by states or corporations, but they're initiated by ordinary civilians. But we also see a growing incorporation of the selfies by businesses and governmental bodies. So what I want to pay attention to is this mobilization of the selfie genre. And by the way, when I'm talking about selfie, I refer not only to the mobile snapshots of oneself, but broadly in images of self and viral digital circulation. So before somebody says, oh, these pictures were taken by another person, technically they're not a selfie. So I'm including these in selfies because even if the snapshot is taken by someone else, then the person puts them on their own social media accounts in circulation. So this use of selfie genre to make a socio-political statement or to protest or to encourage social change clearly challenges the popular view of selfies as narcissistic, apolitical, and maybe even antisocial. Instead, what I argue, it invites us to think about this as a practice of civic engagement. That is, adds to stereotypical practices of citizenship, such as voting. Although other conceptual framework also began to emerge. For example, there is some research on digital citizenship as a form of collective storytelling. But what we need to ask is not just how selfies are used in these projects of civic engagement, but what kind of citizenship do they create? What kind of citizenship are we talking about? So first of all, we need to open up the definition of citizenship. For example, is citizenship a form of nationalism? What about a violent militarized citizenship of a settler colonial nation like Israel? What about global citizenship? So at the moment, with the global pandemic, we're witnessing a form of global citizenship. What about the diasporic citizenship, an anti-colonial one? So is citizenship a reiteration of entitlement, like in the case of Israelis, or is it a powerful protest of those whose citizenship is violently denied or who are subjected to murderous racism of their state? So is it a citizenship that is based on something local or on a movement, or perhaps, as Angen Eisen suggested insightfully in his book, we can think of citizenship as something that works across frontiers. So he suggests that we need to shift from thinking about subjects that move to subjects that act. So he calls it acts of citizenship. So, and then to think about how actions transverse frontiers. So I really think it's useful thinking about today when we're looking at various actions, and in particular selfie actions in the case of COVID-19, globally, some forms of global solidarity. So we're looking at not citizenship as a form of location or as a form of belonging to a country or a passport, but a form of collective action within and across borders. So the notion of an acting subject is particularly interesting here. For Eisen, citizenship is a form of political subjectivity. So citizenship is not something one is born with, like your passport, or something that can be given or taken away, but rather it's something that is performed, something that is enacted. So in that respect, selfie-based actions are indeed acts of selfie citizenship. And these are acts through which various forms of citizenship can be performed with various effects. And this is largely what I'm addressing today, looking at various acts of citizenship in various political contexts. So this is as far as selfies as a form of active citizenship goes, but there is more. Acts of selfie citizenship still remains to be theorized, both as a way to think differently about citizenship in social media age and as a framework for a more nuanced understanding of mobilizing selfies. And to do so, we need to approach it as a complex phenomena placed at the intersection of visual iconographies, as in what appears in an image, and social practices, political contexts, and computer algorithms. For example, we need to examine acts of self-citizenship as simultaneously a visual phenomenon, that is, what kind of iconographies are mobilized in those acts of self-citizenship, and how do these images travel? How are they read and perceived by different audiences? So visual phenomena, but also a networked one. How and where these acts are circulated? How and when do they become visible and to whom? Let's think about algorithms that show some images and bring into circulation others. So who are the human and non-human audiences? So I'm thinking about computer audiences. And we need to think about various encounters that are part of these digital acts of self-citizenship. In other words, rather than analyzing selfies themselves, we need to focus on the newly emerging techno-social practice that generates particular forms of spectatorial intimacies and performative effects. So these, I suggest, can mediate civil collectivity through an illusion of proximity or illusory proximity at the time when citizenship is increasingly governed through facial recognition and large scale dataization. So there's a shift in my argument from practices of being a citizen to data facial recognition, illusion of intimacy. So let me explain that. So first of all, the intimacy. So selfies in general and selfie-based actions in particular often evoke forms of digital intimacy, whether by directing us to look closely at one's face or by guiding us into people's homes, their bedrooms, their private spaces. We are invited to see semi-naked bodies in the shower. So this one, for example, We Are All Clean is an act of awareness against people living with HIV and AIDS. So to combat the stigma, we're invited to see someone's semi-naked body in the shower. Or if we can think about soldiers, to encounter the deeply penetrating brutality of a militarist culture. You may remember a child, when I was showing Israeli selfies, a child holding a really violent message. We see faces inside of a child's bedroom to get a message about an illness if we're supporting, say, or fundraising, or a thirst for war. Now, messages aside, what we have here is a collapse of the private into the public in a way that reminds us how the seemingly private is and has always been deeply politicized, and how the public, politics, citizenship, and so on, is enacted through the private. So, as scholar Ken Plummer has famously coined that intimate citizenship, ways in which citizenship is enacted through mobilization, regulation, and disciplining of bodies, sexualities, and intimate family practices. So, he particularly focused on non-normative sexualities, but in fact, he reiterates what has long been addressed by feminist scholarship and has long argued that the public and the private always merge and bleed into each other. But also, there is a feeling of closeness, however illusory, so however much it is an illusion, we feel that effective sensation of proximity, sometimes pleasurable, sometimes embarrassing, sometimes terrifying. So, in that respect, our exposure to that's just another example. Our exposure to such selfies can be understood at what Lauren Berlant, this is the book that I'm citing from, called intimate public sphere. So, intimate public sphere is that which when we experience the feeling itself, the feeling of belonging, the feeling of belonging to a certain public. So this is where you simply show up and feel and you're there. So this is actually a quote not from Lauren Berlant, it's from someone, Jenny Rice, who comments on Lauren Berlant's work. And I can share the reference later because it actually slipped off my slide. So we're talking about, let's look at them again for a second. Moments of intimacy where we may feel that we're alone with the person in the selfie. So look, we see people's homes. So I brought you the latest one about stay at home, which literally takes captions of people's homes. So we may feel that we are alone with the person or people in the selfie because it's just you and the screen you're staring at. And indeed, it's that intimacy that precisely that perhaps is one of the reasons that selfies are now adopted so widely and increasingly so, by the way, by states and corporate agents, because it bring us closer together. But we're not alone, nor are those in the selfies, for their images are now forever part of a database of an endlessly improving and developing project of big data and in particular facial recognition and biometrics. This is a technology of governance, which too has been increasingly central to digital forms of citizenship, with regards to social dissent, protest, and border control on one hand, and capitalism and violent embrace of consumer culture on the other. So I'm talking here about the use of facial recognition in controlling borders, in policing, in documenting social protest, but also using them very broadly in consumer culture, where you can pay with your phone, you can be identified with your selfie. So this brings us, and this is where I'm wrapping up, but this is really a key point, and hopefully you can see how far it traveled from the beginning of practices on citizenship. This is the key point around dangers and problems of selfie visibility, because this brings us to the other side of selfie citizenship, which is, if we think about a practice that seems to capitalize on visibility and agency. So it's something that I only touched upon really briefly in my talk, but this is kind of a common understanding that selfies is that, people come together, people put their face in public circulation to make a stand, make themselves visible, empower themselves in their own communities. So it is done by capitalizing on visibility, on being visible, and on agency. So when you take a selfie, it's a very active stance of, taking a position and showing your face. And by the way, sometimes with dire consequences, depends on the context you're in. Showing your face to the entire national or global audience with a particular message could land you in prison. So it's not, we shouldn't take it lightly. However, what I also want to emphasize is rather than just thinking about agency, the mobilization of selfies by citizens needs to be understood as a new social practice that is embedded not only in new forms of agency, but also in new forms of governance and new forms of technosocial violence. So I'm talking here about facial recognition, algorithmic governance. So selfie citizenship is about particular form of spectatorial intimacies and intimate encounters with strangers in cyberspace, and particular form of performative effect that can either create or disrupt the sense of collectivity through this illusion of proximity and capitalize on visibility at the time when citizenship itself is increasingly governed through biometric recognition and large-scale dataization. So I'm pausing here for a second and I'm showing you some pictures of just some snapshots of facial recognition, and hopefully you can see the bottom left is one where we can see how governments can use facial recognition databases on a large scale on the population. And you probably know that Facebook, which is where we put most of our selfies, actually owns the world's largest database of facial recognition. And we can move to something way more sinister. So we can, when you see a picture on Facebook and it automatically recognizes a face and tags a face, moving from that to governments seeing a face and recognizing a face. And again, it's already used very widely when there is digital footage of demonstrations, social protests, and of course, lo and behold, most recently, with governmental attempt to contain and confront COVID-19, facial recognition is now used in that respect as well. And if some people wonder, oh, can we see our faces when we're all wearing face masks? Well, guess what we do? So one of the snapshots is from a news article showing that actually facial recognition software, which of course is getting more and more sophisticated by the minute, it can read and recognize people's faces even with face masks on, because it's not just about how your face looks, it's about a lot of other features. And of course, just think about it, the more selfies we put out there, the more we feed the database, the better it gets. So reading selfie citizenship, I'm concluding, reading selfie citizenship this way requires an entirely new set of critical questions, beyond and away from the argument about selfies as either a futile gesture, as in just some self-focused person doing snapshots of themselves, or a question of format, a question of citizen political mobilization. So is it futile or is it politically active? I think what we need to ask instead is, can we and should we tie today's increasingly digital practices of citizenship, from consumerism to voting to social protest, locally and globally, to the self, the face, and to various forms and regimes of visibility? Or should we instead take apart both the currency of the selfie as a globalized network practice and the notion of citizenship itself? Thank you.
That's great, Adi. Thanks very much for your presentation. I think there's a lot there for people to think about. So I'm thinking that we'll go to questions now. We've got 15 minutes for questions that Jay's going to read out. But just to, I think, in particular, help our Indonesian colleagues, Adi, if you could maybe just speak a little bit more slowly, just to
do my
explain
best.
those things, because there's a lot of interesting stuff there. But I mean, I have the same problem. I know I tend to speak often too quickly, so I have to kind of consciously slow myself down. So when you're answering, if you could maybe slow down a little bit, I think that would be very helpful. Okay.
Okay. I'll try my best.
Okay, over to you, Jay, for the first question.
Okay, so well, basically for the first session of question answer, in this question answer session, we have 3 questions. We've recognized the first question. Well, should I read it all at first, and then you're going to answer it one by one, or like one question answer?
Let's just do one by one.
Okay.
Let's just do one by one.
Okay, so first question from Trevi. The question is, how significant are the hashtag or selfies movement to mobilize people offline or in the real life? Could that also create an illusion of how big or influential the movement is? Okay.
Thank you. That's a really great question. Well, first of all, I would say it really depends on the context, because there are various selfie actions in various places across the globe. So I wouldn't want to say, yes, it's, using a good hashtag guarantees you're going to have an amazing movement, and using a bad hashtag is not. So we have some fantastic examples of hashtags, which had incredible power force, not only to mobilize people in the moment, also to become a movement. So absolutely hashtags are important, but also other things are important. And one of them, which I think is really useful for all of us to think about, is the relations that exist in a particular context, in a particular place, between online technologies and offline activism. So in some places where online technologies are mostly seen as a tool to get people together online, and if we also have really strong networks, offline networks of mobilizing people, then practice of a good hashtag or a good selfie or another good online action can help sustain those networks that are already in place, versus maybe somewhere where we don't have a strong foundation of activism. So what you see is a couple of people online feverishly trying to create a really good visibility, but there is actually nothing behind it. That doesn't mean that online activism is futile. It means that we don't have broader, deeper social context to sustain it. And the tricky thing for me as a researcher is that unless you know the context, you don't actually know. Sometimes you see an amazingly looking social media action, wonderful hashtag, really beautifully creative, a group of people, beautiful, they're all holding, I'm going to hold my iPad, but they're holding, a poster with a message, and it seems to be just clicking, but it's a tiny thing that didn't do any splash and didn't stay there for longer. So I would say let's look at the context, let's look at what else is there, and sometimes it's hard to know.
Mhm. Yeah. I guess, yeah. Okay, so I guess we also have to think about, how actually the online movement can affect the offline movement, because sometimes what happened online doesn't actually reflect what happened offline, right? I mean, there's a lot of people talking, commenting online on Twitter or anything, but in offline, there's nothing. And so for I don't know, for a certain target of advocacy that is not sensitive to online advocacy or online criticism, that it would probably be less significant if you only do it online, right? But
Absolutely.
I guess it really helps if can gather people online to to at least make a very big movement online, and then so people in real life, in their offline life, they can actually do something and get the awareness out of that movement online, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen tons of examples where something fairly small that started online actually ended up mobilizing huge group of people, being noticed by journalists, being seen by the government. Also, to be honest, I would add something that's only very recent. During the times of COVID-19, where so many kind of non-core, non-essential activities were forced to move online as part of the COVID-19 safety, I think we also need to start rethinking kind of the role of online, offline, because
Mhm.
what is happening is that there are, it's still, I'm not saying that everyone is just staying and working from home, but the use of digital technologies in place of something else have increased. So I've seen, for example, actions here in the UK with a hashtag and kind of with a title, isolated but not alone, or stay at home but mobilized. So people are being continuously active from home, maybe at times when it's not possible to do that offline.
True.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Should we move to the second question then, Jay?
Okay, so second question is from Dia. Uh, okay, the question is, how do we know the purpose of people posting selfies? Whether because they want to get involved in social activism, advocate the issue, or basically just following the trends.
That's a beautiful question. Thank you. And the simple answer is we don't.
Yeah.
It's now the kind of more sophisticated answer I would say is that we need to, I mean, unless we're doing, say, an ethnographic research where we can ask people, we can actually, we can contact them and interview them and say, well, Adi, why did you take the selfie? What was your purpose? So apart from doing that, I think we need to think about motivations on one hand. Why do people do it? And effect on the other. It might be that people just wanted to share it with a couple of their friends, ended up being some explosive social action. It
Mm.
might be that people wanted to mobilize a big crowd, ended up a little splash in the tiny social networks. So the effects are unpredictable. And, if we start doing kind of social science analysis, we can think of what do they depend on? Do they depend on, again, the networks, the context? But we can't know for sure. And it's also, I think, for me, the most tricky and possibly the most beautiful thing about social media is that our actions, we're not fully in control of our online actions and our online stuff. There is one example that I always teach in class where I talk about kind of the visual on social media and whether and we own it. And it's a story about a woman who posted a photograph of herself in a blog very personal. I mean, blogs are public, but she was only writing for a small group of friends. And the next day, her face became a base of a meme on something completely different, nothing to do with her. And her face was all over the internet because it was indexed by Google, showed up on Google Images, taken by someone, and turned into a meme. So she meant one thing, and something entirely different emerged. So we don't know. And in a way, in that sense, for me, more useful is to look at the effects, which we can track by online publics, by media response, by kind of political changes, because we literally don't know why did the person do it and whether they had one motivation or three.
Okay. Interesting. So I guess we can move to the third question. Or okay. Okay, the third question is from Freya Ernsting. The question is, how might digital intimacy apply to the use of technology in the current crisis, where selfies are presented within the home, such as on this call? I guess we can see there has been a rise of digital citizenship, as those who may have previously disengaged with the digital are now actively engaging. So I think there's a change of people who used to not using the technology, and now they start to use that because of this condition. What do you think about this?
Absolutely. Thank you. That's really spot on. I mean, it's something that I try to bring a little bit into my talk. And obviously, there is much more to say. That bit in the talk where I talked about intimacies and how we're actually not alone in that encounter between the audience and the selfie. I think that's particularly acute now because even if you think about the context of this seminar, where we're all sitting in our homes and we all have various contexts. Some of them are visible, some of them are not visible, some of them are outside of the screen. So in some cases we can see, our furniture, our books, our desk, our, what's in your room. In some cases, and there are other things that, that we can't see that are outside the screen and off. So many of us are doing teaching online, doing meetings online, so whether it's via Google Meet, via Zoom, via Skype. So where it's slightly different from selfies, but I think we're now witnessing this massive shift where we ended up inviting the world into our private homes, and whether some people have offices or really good looking study spaces or good looking living rooms. Some people, all they have is a bedroom and their work is from their bedroom. So I think this question is really, really useful. And what's folded into it is that current moment where we're thinking about how what is shifting globally and locally, personally and professionally, in this conjunction between personal spaces, intimate lives, intimate spaces, and global connectivity. It might be that this is temporary, not in terms of how much people engage with the digital, but that we will realize that we're streaming from our bedrooms and we'll start, like I did, as an example, for the first time in the last 2 months, I'm sitting in front of a white curtain as opposed to a corner of my messy living room. So maybe we'll start adjusting, or maybe we will start reconsidering what it actually means, where we kind of connected more intimately in a new way. So to me, really, my previous work on selfies is really useful in thinking through that question. And there was, I think, another kind of add-on question that about online engagement, whether more people are now engaging online because of COVID-19. And it's a really beautiful question and a complicated one, because some people engage more because the world is open up to them. So lots of people who are immobile, often due to disability, illness, being confined at home, and they're now able to communicate with so many more people. Sometimes it's kind of a paradoxical issue of access. There are so many cultural spaces like museums, exhibitions, performances that are now streaming for free that we would never be able to see because we could never afford the travel to wherever they're performing, or see the show, even if they come, international ballet. I was just watching ballet yesterday that travels internationally, would never be able to afford the tickets. So all of a sudden we kind of have these new affordances, but we shouldn't forget that also a lot of it is enforced on us because some of us don't have any other choice but to work from home and don't have that fancy study room or clean corner. So it's a kind of a forced encounter into our lives, which we manage to a very different degree. And final thing to the question of engagement, first of all, there is whether people have good connectivity and devices to engage. And I think today is way more acute the question of digital divide, not just globally, but locally in terms of poverty, in terms of class, and those who can't. But sometimes it could also be, speaking of intimacy in homes, those who can, but the household environment doesn't allow it. So if you're living in one room with 5 family members, and you may have an okay broadband connection on the phone, but you won't be talking to your teacher or friend or fellow activist because you barely even have a corner. So thank you for these really, really, really useful and insightful questions.
That's great. Thanks so much, Adi and Jay, for asking those questions. And in fact, if we had more time, I'm sure we had other questions we could ask as well, and we can continue this discussion. But for this part of the seminar, I'm just going to kind of pause there in terms of for Adi. If we have time, we might be able to return back to that later. But I'd like to invite Pascal to give his presentation, and I think you're going to be talking about the role of Twitter, I think, in social movements, which in fact, to some extent, perhaps extends some of the things that Adi's talked about already, some of those themes. So over to you, Pascal. Then after about 25 minutes, we'll go for questions again. Okay, great, thank you.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Let me try to screencast my presentation first. Can you see my presentation now? Is it working? Is it working?
Wait.
Yes, it's working now. We can see it.
Working
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Over to you, Pascal.
All right. So good morning and good afternoon Indonesia time. My name is Joshua Darmawan. I'm a researcher at the Center for Digital Society. And today I will be presenting my work in progress research called Echoing Kejayaan Call in Protest. So it's a little bit introduction of me. I will just skip this one. And the structure of the presentation will be as follows. I will be explaining a little bit about the background and the research question. And then afterwards, I will talk about previous research on social media, Twitter, and social movement. And then I will explain about the data and methods that I'm using in this research. Next, I will be discussing about the findings from the data, and then I will close the presentation by concluding the research. So, a little bit about Kejayaan Memanggil. So Kejayaan Memanggil was a political protest against several problematic bills in Indonesia, which was held on September 23rd, 2019. Kejayaan itself is the name of the street in Yogyakarta where the protest was held. And there was actually a historical background regarding Kejayaan Street because in 1998, during the um, Indonesian Reformation, sorry, there was actually a huge protest on Kejayaan Street demanding the government to step down and demanding the government to let democratic process to be held to decide the next leader of the government. So in 2019, they want to kind of repeat the history, I guess, by holding similar protests on Kejayaan Street.
Sorry,
Sorry.
Pascal.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut, but is this through your presentation? I think it's not there already. Wait.
All right. Let me.
It only shows symbols of video calls and then microphone.
All right. So you cannot see my presentation yet.
Not yet.
No.
Not now.
No. All right.
Wait, no.
Let me try to do it all over again. Wait. All right. Let me just do this. All right. So can you see the presentation now?
Yes.
Okay, so now, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So, um, okay. So, as I said before, there was actually a protest, a huge protest on Kachin Street in 1998, and they kind of want to repeat the same protest again on 2019, but with different demands, totally different demands, because the one held on 2019 was focusing on several problematic bills and basically demanding the government to review all these bills. Um, the protest in Yogyakarta on Kachayan Street was one of the first out of many similar protests held in other cities, such as Jakarta, the capital city, Malang, Makassar, and other cities. So it's huge. Most of these other protests were also being disseminated. The information was distributed through social media too. And as I said before, as I mentioned just now, the information was primarily through social networking sites such as Twitter. And one of the interesting things is that when it comes to the hashtag Kajan Memanggil, the first post that is using the hashtag regarding to the protest was only posted, the first tweet was only posted one day before the protest. So the protest was on September 23rd, and the first tweet was posted on September 22nd. So it's interesting how activists and people that are concerned with the problems, with the problematic bills, try to spread the information very quickly through social media, and in this case through Twitter. So based on that background, I want to find out how Twitter facilitates the mass mobilization for the Kajayan Memanggil protest. So why Twitter? First of all, as a researcher, Twitter is the most feasible platform, I guess, to get data from, because compared to other social networking sites such as Instagram, WhatsApp, and Line, um, Twitter with its API is the most accessible one. As a researcher, we can gather a lot of data and we can analyze like huge volume of data from Twitter. Whereas when it comes to Instagram and especially WhatsApp and Line, since they are messaging applications, it's very difficult to retrieve data from these platforms. And then the second one, we can also see public conversation between Twitter users. So it is related to the structure of Twitter itself. As you can see, Twitter has several features that facilitate conversations and debates between users, such as retweet. So if someone retweets your tweet, then it means that they agree with your content and they want to forward your tweet to their followers, and then retweet with comments. So they want to forward your content to their followers, but they also want to add some of their original opinion on top of the tweet. And it does not necessarily mean that they agree with your tweet. And then we also have replies, so they want to engage in the debate, engage in the topic that you're tweeting. And the fourth one is the favorite or like. So they agree with your tweet, they agree with your argument, but they want to do it in a more subtle way compared to retweet. So we can see how we can identify like different interactions between users because of the way Twitter is being built and Twitter is being designed, and because of the features that they are provided by Twitter. And then the third reason is because of the high number of data that can be analyzed. So once you have created a Twitter developer account and you can access the data through API, then you can basically retrieve huge volume of data from Twitter without even needing to subscribe to their paid subscription. So there are several previous research on Twitter and social movements. The first one talks about how Twitter helps activists managing the complexities of organizing and coordinating mass protests effectively. And based on the research from Theocritus et al. In 2015, for example, they further explain how Twitter can be used in at least three ways. The first one is to mobilize the public to join the protest. And then the second one, Twitter can be used to um, organize the logistics of the offline protest action. And then the third one is to distribute information and to build conversation about the topic, about their concerns regarding the protest. And in addition to that, using social networking sites such as Twitter can lead to the development of weak ties between users. This weak ties between users is very important for activists because it eases up their recruitment process to gather masses, to aggregate people to support the cause and to join the protest. So we can see how Twitter can facilitate social movement and can help activists to further support their cause and to spread the information about their demands and about their concerns to more people without having to rely on uh, strong ties or without having to rely to their immediate connections. So to answer my question on how Twitter facilitates um, social movement, I'm using two methods to analyze the data. The first one I'm using is social network analysis. So basically, I want to see the pattern of interaction between users and how information spread from one user to another. I'm using modularity algorithm here to clusterize the users within the conversation, within the topic. And then the second one is simple content analysis. I basically want to see the topics that come up within the hashtag by using word frequency, and I want to look at the key opinion leaders, and I want to look at the content within the top tweets to see if they are trying to use Twitter to disseminate particular information, or they are trying to invite people to join the protest, and so on and so forth. So the size of the data is 48,574 tweets. I retrieved the data by using Twitter API. Basically, I'm collecting all tweets using the hashtag Kejayan Memanggil. And I collected data from Twitter from midnight on September 22nd, 2019 to 11:59 p.m. Indonesian time. And when we are looking to the hourly tweet count of the hashtag, we can see that the first tweet actually was posted around midnight, 15 past midnight Indonesian time. But the number of tweets only started to pick up around noon. So we can see that around noon, finally, a lot of people are tweeting and retweeting about the protest. And the peak was around 9 p.m. with 6,756 tweets. So this happened exactly one day before the offline protest. And we can see how information basically started to spread when it gains momentum during noon. A lot of people started, a lot of activists and also student accounts started to post tweets regarding the protest around noon, and information spread quickly, and a lot of people, students, and even non-students, people outside of the university started spreading the information and retweeting the tweets. And as you can see, from noon until midnight, there were basically like most of the tweet counts. I think 90% of the tweets was posted from noon until the midnight. So we can see how it happens very quickly. So this is how the conversation spread basically. I hope you can see the video well. Um, so yeah, as you can see, it really happens. It happens very quickly. So during the first 2 seconds, for example, not many people are tweeting. So 1 second represents 6 hours of the day. And during the first 12 hours, we can see that not many people are tweeting about the protest. But then in the next 12 hours, we can see that a lot of people are basically tweeting about the protest, and the number of tweets only started to go up after noon. Okay. And so here's the network of the tweets. We can see that there are at least 7 major clusters with coverage of more than 5% each. Um, the tweets and the users uh, were clusterized, were grouped by using modularity algorithm. And we can see how from these 7 major clusters, almost all of them are centralized. They usually have one key account that becomes the source of information, and other people are basically just retweeting or interacting with this one account that becomes the source of information. However, we can also see an anomaly uh, within the yellow cluster, if you can see it, cluster number 4, the yellow one. So we can see how the shape of the cluster is different. It's unique compared to the other clusters, and we can see that the spread of information is more decentralized compared to the other 6 clusters. And I will talk about it later on my next slide. So regarding the key accounts within this hashtag and the top tweets, the tweets that got retweeted the most by the users, we can see that a lot of them, or basically all of them, all of the top 10 most retweeted posts are calls for others to join the protest. The tweets are in both Indonesia, but I will try to summarize some of them. So basically, the most repeated post over here from Berdikari book invites people to join the protest on Gajayan Street, and a lot of them also attach digital posters containing some words that persuade people to come to the protest, to join the protest, and also pictures or videos regarding screenshot of lectures, for example, um, what is it, recommending the students or asking their students to just skip the class. So basically, the lecturers want the students to join the protest instead of coming to the class, and they want to, what is it, dismiss the students to just skip the class and join the protest. There are also pictures or videos related to the protest in 1998. And basically, all of these top tweets want to invite or want to call people to join the protest, and they want to spread the information about the protest and raise people's awareness about the demand of the protest. And regarding the anomaly, we can see that in this cluster, for the yellow cluster, we can see that users are mostly retweeting and or replying to each other instead of interacting with one key account. So you can see that there is no one account that becomes the source of information, but instead they're actually, the conversation is more decentralized. And if you see the content of the tweet, we can see that the top tweet, for example, from cluster number 4, brings in issues related to religious sentiment and the re-emergence of the Communist Party, which is not relevant at all to the demands of the protest, which talks about several problematic bills. So we can see that when it comes to cluster number 4, there's actually a free riding phenomenon. So basically, some people want to free ride the hashtag and they want to push another agenda instead of supporting the agenda that was originally brought up by the activists using the hashtag. We can also see this free riding attempt by these accounts by looking at the words that are being used by these accounts. So basically, they bring up about PKI or the Indonesian Communist Party, which was now defunct, and they talk about how um, in recent days there has been attempts to resurrect or to um, establish another Indonesian Communist Party, and about the Muslims and the Rohingyas in Cambodia, and how there's this genocide in towards the Rohingya people in Cambodia, which is totally irrelevant to the demands of the protest. So we can see how there is still some free riding attempt from some people to push their own agenda that is totally unrelated to the protest. So for conclusion, we can see how activists try to make the hashtag so popular that it will appear on trending topics and get retweeted to wider audience to raise people's awareness. And it is in line with previous research on how retweeting or tweeting can be used can be used for social action. And it also links back to this research before on how people try to use social media to further their social what is it causes, and how people use social media basically to spread um, their concerns or their demands. And then the second one is on how Twitter actually lowers the cost of collective action by enabling individuals to participate quickly by retweeting. And we can see how the information was spread very quickly within 24 hours. The first tweet was posted exactly the day before the protest, and then afterwards, in the next day, a lot of people come to um, Kajayan Street to join the protest. So we can see how Twitter helps spreading the information because of the low effort and the low cost of people to contribute to the cause to spread the information, because they can just retweet it and they already spread the information so easily. So it doesn't really require a lot of effort, a lot of time for people to contribute to the cause and spread their information to others. Um, the third one is on how social networking sites such as Twitter is proven to be vital to youth activism, to activism being done by the younger generation, as it provides a space for them to participate in political discussions. So a lot of young people are using social media, using social networking sites, and it becomes a very fertile ground for activists to spread their cause and to raise awareness about some issues, because of how these young people are frequently using social media, and they often uh, use social media actively so that they can spread their information to their circles. And as I mentioned before, um, it leads to the growth in the weak side, so that activists no longer have to rely on their immediate connection, or no longer have to rely on face-to-face or a more intensive interaction with people to persuade them to join their cause, to join their protest, because of the existence of Twitter that facilitates the spread of information. And the last one is future research to develop future a recommendation to develop this research in the future. I'm actually uh, submitting this research for a proposal right now, and what I'm going to do next is to analyze the content using topic modeling. So hopefully I will be able to identify like several different topics within the hashtag, and to better identify how activists are using Twitter, or different people, not only activists, but also the media helps the spread of the information. And this is related to point number three, which is to identify user roles within the conversation. I think it is important to see if the ones who drive the interaction, to drive the engagement, are activists, or there are also like people outside of the activist circle that contribute to raising the awareness about the protest. And then the other method that I'm interested to explore next is to interview student activists to find out if they actually plan the strategy to spread the information online. So I've been curious to know if they actually have some strategy before basically deploying or spreading their information on social media such as Twitter and Instagram. And if they do have that strategy, then I want to find out what their strategy really is. But if not, then I want to really ask for their impressions or their opinions on how Twitter or social media really helps their cause and really spread the information about the protest. So I guess that's all from me. I'm open for comments or questions. Thank you.
That, That's great. Thank you very much, Pascal. Do you want to just that's it? Just take the presentation off for now so that we can see you. Okay, so we've got a kind of couple of questions to ask, and I'll just kick off with the first question. So the analysis you did was pretty much on the amount of Twitch activity in the day leading up to the protest, and then presumably the day of the protest itself. Did you do some further analysis the day after to see whether or not that level of activity was maintained or whether it grew or not?
So yeah, after so on the day of the protest, the activity increased very significantly. But most of the tweets are actually reporting about the protest, or some of the people actually taking selfies on the venue of the
Okay,
protest to show people that, hey, I'm joining the protest. So it
right,
becomes a trend actually. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing towards the cause of the protest. That's for another
right.
discussion. But a lot of people actually posted pictures of themselves on the venue.
Okay, so it almost became a sharing of a kind of community protest, but social activity as well, almost possibly.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So I think Jay, you had a question, I think, from one of our guests, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, we've already had one question. That is from Heidira. This is a question from YouTube. And the question is: now we see more and more online buzzers thrive in Twitter. How harmful is this to digital activism or the issue that is being promoted, seeing as this buzzer rarely contribute constructively in the discourse? What do you think about this, Pascal?
Okay, that's a good question. So it really depends, right, on how massive the destruction really is. Because in this case, when it comes to Kajayan Mamangil, the destruction was not really massive. We can see that the number of tweets that are not relevant to the protests are not really significant. It basically only represents like around 5% of the whole conversation. So in this case, then it is not really that harmful because the magnitude is not that big. But in other cases, then I guess it is harmful towards the activism because it can distract from the demands and from the concerns that they are trying to be brought up by the activists. But other than that, I think we also need to acknowledge that any publicity is a whether it's good or bad is still a publicity. One of the what is it? One of the ways for these activists to raise people's awareness is to create high engagement or create high use of the hashtag so that it would appear on the list of the trending topics. So even if there are some buzzers that use the hashtag and try to push another agenda, if this helps the topics to be talked about by other users, then at first I guess it's good to raise the awareness about the protest, about the cause. But then what really happens is the aftermath of that. After people uh, are getting the awareness about the protest, then what happens? Do these buzzers keep trying to take over the hashtag and keep trying to spread their own agenda by using this hashtag that it overshadows the original cause, or is it not big enough to overshadow the cause? Then that's still that depends on case per case basis. But in the case of Gajan Mamangil, fortunately, it doesn't really overshadow um, the main concern itself, and it is also mostly because of how the information was spread very quickly. It happened one day before, and then afterwards, on the 3rd of September, people already joining the protest offline. So it happened very quickly, so it doesn't really have room for the buzzers to build their agenda within the hashtag itself.
That's great. Okay, I think we have another question, Jay. I think.
Yeah. So we have two more questions actually.
Okay.
So the second question is from. Okay, so four more question. Okay, so I'm gonna choose. Okay, probably this one first. So from it's getting exciting. Okay, from Trevi again. In Indonesia, where there are many social media users that voice their opinion online, how has the government responded to it? Are those concerns being taken into consideration for policy making? Okay, that's question.
Okay, so it's about social media and how the government try to incorporate it in their policy making process, is it? Hello.
Yeah, hello.
I'm just trying to make sense of the question. So basically, she's asking about how the government is trying to incorporate social media into the policy making process. Is that the
Yeah,
question?
yeah. She's trying to ask whether the government actually put this opinion that happened online into consideration. I mean, if it's offline, then we can probably be
All
more
right.
sure. Okay, yeah.
Well, I think when it comes to online activism, um, it really depends on how um, this translates into offline protests. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to a country like Indonesia, the government are still not really active on social media. We can see that a lot of ministries and department and the ministers and the president itself are not really engaging with the people, and they often use social media in one way. So it's not a two-way communication. So um, I think social media is good to gather the voices and to mobilize the mass. But when it comes to influencing the decision of the government, offline protest works better because um, even though we gather a lot of voices on social media and we basically have like a lot of tools such as online petition and stuff, if there is no direct consultations and there is no direct protest in a real life protest towards the government, then at least for now, because of how the condition within our government on how they're still not optimally using social media for what is it to gather opinion from the public, then it is not really significant towards the policymaking process. However, I'm talking about the context of Kajan Memanggil here. Nowadays, we can see that during COVID-19, a lot of people are trying to voice out their protest towards governance policies and stuff. And because of the limitation of, doing gathering in real life and so on and so forth, I guess the government is being forced to listen to these concerns online. So now the government is starting to consider the conversation that is happening online. In addition to that, the conversation on social media is also growing because people cannot really do the conventional way of doing protests. So they move it to social media. So the magnitude of the protest on social media is growing. So it forces the government to pay attention to these concerns on social media, to the uh, demands from the people on social media, and eventually the government are listening to the public, to people who speak their mind on social media.
Mm, okay. Okay,
So
so this is okay. Kevin, you have anything to say?
no, I think we have a couple more questions. I think have come up on the to ask Jay. I
Okay.
think.
Yeah, right. So, I think this will also end. So we actually have two more questions. But then the second question is already answered by the explanation before this. So I think we just have to move to. Oh, by the way,
So
the answered question is that how can we actually measure whether an issue is being called successful or not? Because I mean, but as Pascal said, that in Indonesia, uh, uh, if they, I think we can conclude that if the issue doesn't come on the road and it only goes to the social media, then means that the government would probably be less um, be less affected towards and be less uh, aware about it. Okay. And then, so I think we're moving to the next question. The next question is from Ria Kartika. And the question is, I think this is regarding the misinformation, I guess, Twitter or disinformation. So the question is, Twitter can be used for public discussion and make mass movements. How do we get valid information? Because because in social networks, many people use uh, anonymous identity.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So I guess when it comes to Kajayan Mamanggil, for example, I cannot really speak about other cases. But in case of Kajayan Mamanggil and then previous cases such as Occupy Wall Street and then Arab Spring, there are actually some users that are already being known as activists, as the key opinion leaders in these protests. So that's one way to really know whether the information that is being spread is valid or not. You can see the source of the information, whether it comes from someone who's been known to be involved in these protests or not. That's the first one. And then secondly, there this social media is also being used as an extension for other platforms. So for example, they have a website or they have some other platforms that are being used to contain like all the information regarding the protest, and then they use Twitter to attach the link to this website or perhaps to Google Drive, for example, so that people can go to this Google Drive or go to this website and then they can see like official information, official details regarding the protest. So that's another way. Um, and then other than that, people can also try to verify the information by trying to cross it with information from others. For example, if you stumble upon a tweet talking about the mechanism of the protest, for example, you can also try to find other tweets that tries that or whether there are also other tweets that confirm those information. So there are actually many ways to try to validify information on social media because at the end of the day, information on social media is just the same as information uh, in real life or on other platforms online. But I also acknowledge that there are a lot of people posting on social media anonymously, and that makes the work of validifying the information more difficult. But it is not impossible to uh, try to validify the information on social media.
Okay, that's very helpful, Pascal. Thank you for that, and also thank you for all the questions that people have asked. I'm afraid we're not going to be able to cover all of them. I'm conscious that we're due to finish in about 9 minutes' time, and especially I think for our colleagues in Indonesia, it's Ramadan, so I think you're probably looking forward to breaking your fast shortly. So we'll kind of finish in a couple of minutes, but maybe uh, what I suggest is if perhaps first Pasca and then Adi may wish to just make one kind of final comment or some kind of reflection to maybe end the seminar, and then we'll bring it to a close. So Pascal, any kind of final thoughts from you about your work and where you think you're going to take it? I think you've told us a little bit already.
All right. So I think it's very interesting to see how social media can be used for people to further their cause, to promote their cause, and to even try to get involved to and contribute to a social movement. But if there is one thing that I want to highlight is on how it is still very difficult to measure whether this um, social movement online can create real change in real world. And on top of that, it is also tricky to really see how uh, raising awareness online could translate to real outcome in real world, such as on how In Gajah Mango, for example, there's a lot of people tweeting it, but you will never know if these people who express their intention of coming to the protest will for real come to the protest on the D-Day. So I guess these are some things that can be explored further on how we can see the connection between activism that happen online and the outcome in real life, and how the awareness online can translate to real action offline.
That's great, Pascal. And I think it's a kind of really interesting way to finish your part and your presentation. So I'm going to hand over to Adi for one last reflection, Adi, on your discussions and your thoughts.
Thank you. Thanks, Kevin. And thanks, Pascal, for the talk. I really appreciated how the two of them link together. And there is something that I want to wrap up with is that something that I brought up with my talk, and I think is becoming more and more important and will become more important kind of as we go on with increased digital use, is the role of what I and other scholars call non-human audiences to what we do. So most of our questions as social scientists, I guess, have to do with human action. What do we mean? Why do we do it? What's the impact? So this is all with regards to individuals or social structures. Non-human audiences, meaning computers, they don't have brains or souls, but they do see, if you like, or aggregate data on what you do. And there are two things that are important. One, what is or what might happen with it in real time. For example, how can the information we provide or activists provide during actions can be used, for example, by police services or governments or corporations to be mined and analyzed. So that's in real time. So what kind of dangers do activists potentially put themselves or others into by using these tools? And we often are not aware of them. But also I would like to throw the question or the thought about the future, because not only that these things are transmitted online, they also remain online for later. We don't know for how long, possibly for very long. So there's a kind of digital memory that we create, and it may be safe now, but may become not safe in 5 years' time. I don't think we can even imagine how these technologies will work in the future. So I think the role of algorithms and computer and digital memory as an invisible witness or audience to what we do, and it could be both positive and negative. Maybe digital recordings, say, of violence will become a sort of future court of justice. But maybe participation in political protest will become a source of future imprisonment. So I would like to put this forward as something to think about as an invisible part to digital participation. And thank you once again. It was most inspiring. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Adi, and thank you, Pascal. And then just to pick up from your point about digital memory, Jay, perhaps you can talk a little bit. Is this seminar going to be uploaded on your YouTube channel after this? So it'll be there forever and a day.
It will be available, I guess, but I guess it will be I think it will be processed for a while, and then after this, it will be available to watch anytime. Yeah,
that's great. Okay, right. Okay, well, I think as we finish there, let's kind of finish a little bit early. So thank you very much, Pascal. Thank you very much, Adi, Jay, for helping to manage this, Raka, and your colleagues at CfDS for all the technology, which seems to have actually it's worked pretty well, right? A couple of glitches, but it's worked very well. And hopefully, in discussion with Raka and Jay and CfDS colleagues, we'll join again and run another joint webinar with yourselves, maybe in the next couple of months. Okay, yeah. So we look forward to seeing you again, and thanks everyone for attending today, and thanks in particular to Pascal and Adi for their input. So we'll see you all soon. Okay, goodbye.
Goodbye.